Stephanie Dobson is back with us this week. Stephanie is a local lawyer and mediator at Henka Divorce Law and Mediation. And we've been spending the past several months talking about a number of different issues surrounding divorce and separation in healthy, thriving families in two homes. And Stephanie, this week, this is a big one. We're going to be talking about child support. So we're going to call this part one of a two-part series because there is so much to talk about. So first of all, before we get into it, let's just talk about the basics of how child support is calculated.
Yeah, Stacey, when I was getting ready for this particular topic, we probably could have done this in an 8-part series. I mean, child support in and of itself is such a complicated topic, but I'm really going to just break it down into the very basics. And of course, you're going to need to talk to a lawyer, a divorce professional to get really some of the specifics, because this is, of course, one of the most hotly contested and fought areas of law with respect to separation and divorce. So these are just the very, very basics. So let's start with base support. So that's what we're going to focus on today. This is the part of child support that covers food, clothing, and shelter. So it's the amount that most people will refer to as their monthly support. You'll say, I pay $800 a month in child support, or I pay $600, or I receive $600 a month in child support. Typically, that's for that food, clothing, and shelter. So next week, we're going to be talking about the second component, which is what I call the extras. It's under Section 7 of the Child Support Guidelines. So you'll hear these expenses referred to as Section 7 expenses. It's a commonly used phrase. So under this part of the guidelines, there are specific categories of expenses that will get shared between two parents as part of the total support calculation.
Okay, so Stephanie, you mentioned the base support. So let's dig into that first of all. How is the base support calculated?
Right. So child support is calculated using something called the Child Support Guidelines. I'm sure lots of people have heard of these. So there's the federal child support guidelines, and then there's the provincial child support guidelines. And they'll apply to different people depending on their spousal relationship and their situation. But there's 4 components when you're actually getting down into the nitty-gritty of calculating child support. There's 4 components. So it's based on the income of the paying parent, the province of residence of the paying parent, the number of children, and then the parenting schedule or the parenting arrangements. So we'll get into that a little bit further.
And when it comes to income, obviously that can be something that there's a number of different ways to figure that out. But in this scenario, how is income calculated?
So income is one of the more contentious issues. It's calculated again using the child support guidelines, and it gets complicated. It can get complicated, shall I say. If it can be actually very simple, if one of you is the paying parent is a T4 income earner. So if they're an employee somewhere and they get 1 T4 or 2 T4s in a year, we can simply use that T4 number or their income tax return number to calculate their child support. The income for the purpose of child support. So where it can get complicated is where a parent earns money from other sources. So there might be things like a corporation, a trust, any other kind of business, a small business, farming income, fishing income, any other self-employment kind of income, where the personal tax returns may or may not show the full extent of someone's income. So in those cases, we need to look a little bit further than just that personal income tax return, and we need to look at all of the income sources to calculate support.
Now, one of the things, Stephanie, that you mentioned is a factor that comes into play is a parenting schedule. So what about the parenting schedule can impact support?
So there's 3 different parenting schedules that we usually look to when we're calculating child support. So the first one is where the children are residing with one parent primarily. And when I say primarily, the child support guidelines defines that as living with one parent at least 60% of the time. So that means that the other parent has less than 40% of the time. So in that case, it's calculated under one particular section of the child support guidelines. It's actually called Section 3. Then there's another set of calculations that get done when there's something called shared parenting. So that's where most people will consider it somewhat of an equal parenting basis. So that might be 50-50 as far as the time allocation. That might be 60-40, but it's where the child support guidelines defines it as at least both parents having at least 40% of the time with the children. So then it just there's a bit of a different calculation that gets done, and there's other factors to look at.
Now,
then there's one more, Stacey.
Sorry, yeah.
That's okay. So there's one more, and it's called split parenting. So that's where children are actually split between two homes. There might be one or more children living with mom primarily, and one or more children living with dad primarily. And then yet again, there's some more calculations that get done.
Now, this is a lot, Stephanie, to figure out. So if you are looking at trying to decide what support is, can you do it yourself, or do you have to have a lawyer involved?
Well, everything is possible to be done as a self-represented person without a lawyer. No one has to get a lawyer. But my goodness, some of these things can be very complicated. And so, as I said before, if you're very simple income earner, as in you earn T4 income, you can actually there's a Government of Canada website. If you do a Google search for online child support calculator, you'll get to the Government of Canada website, and you can plug in your information, and it will and you press calculate, and it will spit you out a number. But for the most part, you'll need to get some kind of a divorce professional involved, whether it's a lawyer or a mediator or a judge involved, to help you to figure out support, because there are some of those things like income and even parenting arrangements. When people get down to the percentage of time that's spent with each parent, it can get a little bit more complicated.
Well, Stephanie, this is a very complicated issue, and that's why we've broken it up. So thank you so much for speaking with us today about this. But next week we'll come back and we will tackle more and get even more in depth on how to figure out and some of the things that are involved with child support. So thank you once again for speaking with us this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stacey.